Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Inside Track presented by CallReview. We have a very exciting show today. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, we're going to be talking about AI at the Crossroads, right where intelligence can drive growth. We all know, if you saw my LinkedIn post and you've seen the promotions and the stuff my two guests have been talking about, we know that AI has really reached a turning point. And it's really a question of no longer if it should be used, but how, why, and to what end. And in this session, we're going to talk to Brent Weiss, who I'm going to bring on the stage here in just a minute, and our AVP of Data and AI, Andrew Diadio, around how to evolve from really using your data to that predictive intelligence layer, and where AI can become a powerful tool, but around growth. But with that, it really depends on how you're going to expose liabilities and things along those lines, and then how you're going to apply that strategy. And if you just shotgun an approach to AI, it's not going to work all that well. So enough about that. You guys don't come here to see me just talk about it. Let me go ahead and get both of my guests on stage. Welcome, Mr. Weiss, and welcome, Mr. Diadio, to the show. Before we really dive in, why don't we go around and do a round of introductions? Everybody knows who I am, of course. Brent, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience, and then we'll go to Andrew.
Okay, thanks. Hey, everybody, it's Brent Weiss. If you see me on LinkedIn, I'm a certified AI trainer now, but 2 decades in the automotive industry from an agency partner standpoint, and then from a product incubation standpoint. So now I focus on getting those dealers and those organizations literate. That's me.
Love it. Andrew.
Hey guys, Andrew Diadio. I'm the AVP of Data and AI Strategy here at CallReview. I've been with CallReview for about 5 years now. So really, kind of anything that we're doing as an organization involving data and AI, not surprisingly, I'm going to be involved with. But really, that's helping us kind of come up with new insights, help figure out how to make the product work better for our customers. So especially now, it's a really exciting time to be in that role. So I'm happy to be here today and talk with you guys.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for joining us. I know we love getting insights, and this is a topic I'm very passionate about. Brent, you and I met in Kansas City during an NCM event, and we kind of hit it off, which was a lot of fun, which is finally we led us to this road. We've been trying to get this to go for months. And then Andrew, I know you and I spar daily almost around how AI can be used and better utilized inside of our products. So as we tee up our first section here and dive in, let me go ahead and we're going to introduce a poll to our audience. You're going to see that post up here in just a minute. Go ahead and respond to it. It should be popping up on the right side of your screen as we get into there. And then let's go ahead and dive into our first topic, guys. So right now we know that AI is everywhere. And there's a big difference between talking about AI and then actually leading with it, which we do. So really, I wanted to start where organizations really are today and why so many leaders feel both excited and conversely incredibly uneasy at the same time when it comes to AI. So why don't we start with you, Brent? So you work with a lot of leaders across industries. You've done it for decades now. How would you describe the average organization's relationship to AI right now and what you're seeing out there?
If we're looking at the average organization's relationship with it, I found now I've been in-depth live workshopping with dealer groups and dealers now, and I still think they're in the shallow end. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. There's still a lot of organizations that when you get to the room, normally I do an intake just like your poll, like how much are you using it? What are you using it for? And I find that there's within every group, there's a very small percentage of active users, right? Really looking at the tools for their productivity, for data synthesis, for content creation, but most of the organizations are still very much early days. They're using it lightly, if hardly at all for work. Like they're using it, they have it on their phones. They're using their mobile devices to use it for other things. But what I'm seeing and what I'm talking to is most of them get so busy in their day to day that they don't really stop and pull back and dive in. But so that's the general consensus. But I guess it's like any sort of wave of technology. There's always like a 5% group that have multiples of people inside their organization or inside the stores that maybe are doing different things. I have a call this afternoon with a team of people from a dealer group that are, working as a group on some projects. But that is few and far between, and I think it's just because we all just have to find the time to stop and learn it.
Right.
So I think right now, to keep it short, that right now, if I'm talking about the majority of dealers, a lot of them are trying to install and implement more learning right now still.
Sure. Andrew, what do you think about that one?
Well, I would say too, it's very much a continuous process, and I think more so than other kind of technology waves we've seen. And what I mean by that is, like, you might be at the forefront of AI adoption a year ago, but if you stayed still and you're still doing the same things, guess what? Now you're behind, right? Because the way in the speed in which these things are evolving and changing, it's really a little bit unprecedented, right? Like the ability for AI to do things and reason with things now is so much stronger and more powerful than it was even 5, 6 months ago. So I think for organizations now more so than ever to stay at kind of the tip of that, it's this continuous process, right? You have to dedicate time to it. You have to dedicate R&D budgets to it. You have to have teams that are actually trying to stay at the forefront of it, because if you're just mastering it point in time, 4 or 5 months go by, guess what? Your competition, if they're continuously learning, they're going to be ahead of you, right? So, and I think this is a little bit different in other kind of technology waves, right? Like when you think about things the last 10, 20 years, things moving off-prem to the cloud, like you kind of did it or you didn't do it. Yeah, there were some hybrid things, but once you did that, you were there. But in this case, the tools are always changing. They're getting better and better every day. So I think organizations really need to spend time, resources, and put those R&D budgets in there to actually try to stay at the forefront of some of these things.
Sure. Yeah. And I think, we're seeing a lot of that, Andrew, in what we talk to dealerships, on a daily basis. And I think it's interesting to think about what you said, Brent, too, is, you're still in that phase of like educating, and you're still in that phase of like getting people ramped up. And I feel like there's a lot of tools, like, I flip through my Instagram feed. I'll open TikTok every now and then because my daughter will send me something or my son will send me something. And it's like, have you seen this tool? Have you seen this tool? There's such a proliferation of tools and nobody really knows where to start. Mm-hmm. How is it, Brent, in your opinion, when you go in to educate these dealers, how do you see them really changing? How are you working to change that philosophy of, it's not about just like throwing tools at the wall and seeing how many of you get in there. It's really about being insightful and having intent in driving those. And how is that conversation going from like, oh, I've got to have AI, to like thinking about how am I going to layer in AI in with intent across the dealers you work with?
If I'm working with them to lay in intent, it's a great, that's a great point that you were mentioning about, like, if you open up your feed and you hear people talking about all these different platforms, it becomes overwhelming. And I know that too, because there's times where if I'm allowing myself to kind of let the cascade of like you should be doing wash over me, like, and I'm like, am I using enough platforms? Am I using enough this? Yeah, it can get very overwhelming, and you can constantly feel like you're drowning. But when I'm working with the dealerships, like the first thing I say to them is, let's just back up and focus on what I say to them is small win strategies. Like if you're trying to get collectively more people on this at the same speed with the public facing tools, then I want to do it in little bite-sized pieces. It's almost like get your reps up, right? So if we can get into a Chat GPT, if we can get into a Gemini, whatever they want to use first, like let's get those reps up. It's almost, and you too as product people, I kind of treat it the same way as like way back when I went back to school for coding and development, things like that. You were taught to write HTML. You didn't use like you didn't use a tool. You didn't use it, like you wrote code. So I sort of approach the way I work with the dealerships is where I'm going to teach you how to write it. Like I'm going to how to think about it as raw code. And then once you have that, it ramps up really quickly. I think for when I'm working with the dealerships, it's just like one platform at a time. How are we? Have we mastered this platform? Great. Let's add one more piece, and let's add another building block and another building block. So, through a coursing, like you could have them working through just prompting and agent builds, like you and I were doing in Kansas City with that big workshop I threw.
Yep.
But over time, you start working with connectors, you start working with other platforms, you start bridging gaps. But honestly, it's a small win strategy. Like keep adding a bit, because to your point about there's so many tools and there's so many things, and it can become very overwhelming. And especially with this, there's this feeling and sort of a trope of, and it's not to disqualify what Andrew was saying earlier about, like, the things change so much, and if you're not sort of sticking with it, you're going to be behind. There is That's very much a universal truth about how fast the AI is moving. But I think if you're going to get overwhelmed with we're not using enough tools, that's where you can actually step back and take a beat and go, are we really using the tools we already have really well? And I think that's just an overall universal truth about the automotive industry itself, with the tools that CallReview builds to the training that people like me give them, right? Like, are we doing the best we possibly can with what we have? And if we are, then let's find one more small thing to add to that.
Right. I think you bring up an interesting point. I want to get your perspective too, Andrew, is right. It's no longer, and Andrew, you and I talked about this the other day. It's no longer about like, okay, I think about the old tech stack diagrams, right? Where you have this, in the marketing world, it used to be a big thing where if there was I can't remember what organization did it, but they would give you an award for your tech stack and how you line that up anymore. And now you've got this element that you can layer in that kind of just eliminates in a big way some of that tech stack and some of that tooling that you need to do, because it can rearrange that. And I love that point that you made, Brent, around, it's about that small iterative step on how we can leverage the tools that we already have in a better way, in a more productive way, and then build on top of them. So going back, Andrew, you said something interesting again around, and Brent brought it up too, is around, that fear of falling behind. You think it's more of a, the dealership down the street is doing this, I have to do it too? That's pulling me into it? Or is it really a fear of like, I'm going to be missing out on revenue versus that like more visceral emotional FOMO thing?
I mean, absolutely. I think ultimately it's going to be a fear of falling behind, and falling behind means you're selling less cars, servicing less cars, right? So if your competitor down the street is leveraging these tools and they're doing better lead prospecting, or they're nurturing their fixed ops audience better than you, they're eventually going to start eating into your business too, right? So there's definitely that fear of it. But what I would say is that dealers, and anyone really, you really just need to lead with your strategy, right? Don't lead with tools. Don't think about all the tools, because we've talked about this a little bit now, that there's just so many things out there.
Right.
Think about your strategy first. What are you trying to do? Are you trying to make more leads for the sales department? Are you trying to nurture your service and fixed ops audience? What are you trying to do? And then you can figure out which tools to use, right? Because most likely it's going to be a mix. And then depending on each strategy, there's going to be different tools that you use for that, right? You want to use the right tool for the right job. So I think that's where there's some kind of confusion right now too, of these, that kind of, well, me too, I want to also do AI too and use AI too, but well, what are you going to use it for? Just think about that first. Think about your use cases and be really strategic with it. And then you can figure out what's actually going to work for you. Because there actually could be cases where maybe the one thing you want to do, you don't necessarily need an AI tool for it, right? Maybe there's some connection with an API you can make to some vendor system or whatever it may be. So you don't necessarily need to go down a certain path, right? Yeah. So I think that's something that we see a lot, where you're not leading with the strategy if you're just thinking about tools, because you're like in the Twitter ecosystem, you're seeing all these things out there, the next new thing that's out there, everyone wants that thing. Well, is that thing actually going to solve your business case? Is it going to help you execute on your strategy?
Right. I agree with that. And sorry, I got a text message from my son right then as it came in. So I got very distracted. I saw a shiny object and something popped up on my screen. So in both of your reviews, and Andrew, we'll start with you since you're up in the screen, right? And I think you were kind of getting there. What does it mean to lead with AI versus simply just adopting it, right? In a tool set? Is it more like I've got my strategy buckled in? Because I feel like a lot of times we have this concept of we get mired down in the strategy, and sometimes you just got to cowboy up a little bit and like throw it against the wall and see where it's going to break to understand what's really going to happen. So what does it mean, in your opinion, to really lead by AI, and how can dealers,
Right.
do that versus simply just adopting it?
Yeah. So my thought on that is that listen, everyone's gonna have to be using AI at some point in the future, right? We know most people are leveraging it in some way, shape, or form now, but you got to leverage it intelligently, right? Because just throwing AI into the mix can actually do some harm, right? You can alienate your customers depending on if the AI is interacting directly with customers. I think at this point we've all heard the story was 2-3 years ago, a dealership with an AI chatbot that agreed to sell a car for $1, right? I mean, like those kinds of things, you don't really see that happening as much anymore as people are starting to kind of figure these things out. But you can still very much alienate your core audience, so to speak, right? If, let's say, for example, you have a AI chatbot on your website, or an AI voice chatbot on your dealership phone line. If you make that a really frustrating experience for your end customer to actually connect with a human that they want to talk to, guess what? They might hang up and call the next dealer down the street. So if you're using these things, absolutely you should be using them, but you should be thinking about them as force multipliers. How can they make your existing staff, your existing business run better and more efficient? And it's in tension a little bit with the customer experience, right? Because when I call a dealership, I probably do want to talk to a human. But if I do talk to a digital voice assistant, and it's actually helpful and can do what I need it to do, and it's a good experience, I'll be fine with it, right? But if it's not that, I'll be frustrated, and guess what? I might call another dealership, right? So I think it's about using it correctly, not just throwing it in the mix because everyone else has it, so you want it too. It's about using it correctly.
Yep. Agreed. So let's dive into AI. And I think you brought it up, Andrew, which, this dovetails nicely into kind of where we want to go with the conversation. Is, before we talk about risks, let's talk about a little bit of the upside, right? You talk about force multipliers, and where AI is applied intentionally, it can sharpen, and we've seen this with the dealers that use our systems. And I know, Brent, you and I have talked about this before, is it can improve focus, it can improve decisions, it can help leaders make better quality. So, Brent, in your world and the things you do, where have you seen AI generally improve clarity and decision making inside of dealerships?
First place, the first place is I one of the things I've said to dealers is, when it comes to working with vendor and public tools, is build the moat, build the moat, and the moat. If you've got like a partner like a CallReview, or someone that you really trust, and the product's good, like, let that do the hard stuff, right? And then start doing the boring stuff with your AI tools. But the places that I've seen it really expand for the dealers are, it's really department by department, but it's again, it's all the small things where I've seen, the big piece. And this just came out of NADA, and it's something I do in all my workshops, is we do a vendor evaluation tool. We do prompting and assessing. It's always like I try to find things with the dealers where we frame it up around the strategy of what's something that takes you away from your subject matter expertise that really impacts the business. What are the things from an administrative standpoint, from a follow-up standpoint, that are things that you could potentially automate with AI or move through AI? And if we can, my onus to them is to go, let's figure out how much of the heavy work AI can do for you to give you back that deep work time. So if it's doing all the work that you can take, if it's taking what took you 45 minutes to do something in 5, and then you get 55 minutes back in that hour to then, review the output with your team, decide how you want to move through that with, it could be communications, it could be HR pieces. But, I've seen dealer principals, they really like using it from a vendor evaluation standpoint, because historically, the vendors, would come like yourselves, CallReview, reach out to a dealer, set up a demo. And if I'm dealer one and I've got Eric and Andrew coming in, I would probably call a peer in my network, another dealer, and say, hey, how is CallReview? How are their people? How are their follow-up? And I'm getting that one-to-one, right? But now we're dealing with a lot of technology that no one's gone to school for. We have no subject matter experts. Like, there's no one in, none of us, on this side of the aisle, on the dealer side, for the vendor side for in some aspects, no one's gone to, like, the field people that are selling the products and the people that have to sit in the demos. No one went to MIT for comp sci with an AI undergrad, like, minor.
Right.
So how do we set up and prep for those meetings now so we can ask educated questions, get the right answers back? I don't know if my screen's flickering for you guys. It is for me. I don't know if it's the platform. So if that's happening, my apologies. But so building things like that so they can prep for a big meeting that's helping them move through complicated conversation in their eyes. I don't know what to ask. I don't know what to look for. But so some of the work we've done there, really for the decision makers, is a big one for them. Other places I've seen it is I had a young gal at a small dealership out in a rural part of Ontario, the province I live in. She was a service advisor, and she said, we get so much stuff from the OEM. We get so much stuff in our system for our customers. But then she realized one of the things she could use it for with some deeper prompting is to build out and A/B test scripts for declined services. So every single person in the dealership can find something where they go, I don't know what I'd use this for. And if we spend a little time kind of picking away at every minute of the day, we're going to find a couple of exercises so it's almost like a one-to-one. How is a new car sales manager who's also wearing an HR hat because they don't have someone right now because someone's on mat leave? How can they do HR stuff while they're still trying to mentor and help their salespeople sell cars? Like, it's all of those situations in the dealership, honestly, right now where I'm seeing the most of it, which was this last story. But I had a manager. He was also wearing the HR hat. He could use it to do the heavy lifting on the stuff that he just needed to run in the background so he could help salespeople move vehicles, or, talk to someone who's in finance, or talk to a customer that's like, because he's moving, right? He's moving around. He's got lots to do. It's a small city dealership, and he had a lot on his plate. So he could see how AI could help him that way. So again, it's not that there's any big thing outside of what the vendors are providing, but when they start to use the public tools to just get through some of their administrative stuff or their CX stuff, it's big for them.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And Andrew, I want to ask a follow-up question to you, kind of based on Brent's points. Is one of the conversations we're having a lot internally and with some of our customers is what are ways that we can look at AI as a tool, and going back to your point about force multipliers, around shifting behavior from where I feel like for the last it's been all about data and analytics, and how do we look at the data and how do we use the data. And now we have this force multiplier that can now not only just show us the data, but now also make recommendations on where we need to go with that data, right? How do you see dealerships and how do you see the industry taking that from a reactive standpoint, where we're kind of at now, to that more intentional, I've got, 52 calls yesterday that came in and this is what you need to do with them, kind of point.
Right. Yeah. And that kind of ties into a bigger topic I always like to talk about, is that, one of the things that I think is always relevant that we don't always talk about is that a lot of these dealerships, they have a lot of phone interactions, and a lot of them are fine. Right. Like, and maybe that's the stuff that we always want to focus on. These salespeople are doing this wrong. This is bad. This is bad. But, when we look at dealerships that have like 10,000 calls in a month, not all 10,000 calls require attention, right? So, that's one of the things that we're doing, and we're helping is, hey, of those calls in a day, month, could be year, week, whatever, there's a lot there, but there's a lot there that's just kind of average, right? If someone's calling in to ask about hours, or just, hey, the location, I have an appointment, I'm coming in, but I want to make sure I know where exactly you guys are. Like, those are calls that honestly aren't super important in terms of what your management needs to be focusing on, right? So when we talk about getting folks doing what they're good at, I don't want a sales manager or dealer principal or anyone of that caliber going into CallReview or any platform that they're using and just blindly listening to calls looking for problems, right? That's not a good use of their time. A good use of their time is, hey, this platform already flagged maybe 5 out of those 10,000 calls for that time period. You should go look at these and you should go handle these, because maybe there's some CSI implications here. Maybe maybe there's a customer that you might lose for life, right? And so if they're not called back and handled appropriately by management level, that's actual money gone, like gone for life from the dealership, right? So I always like to, especially whenever we're doing kind of demos of call review, one of the things I always love to focus on is looking at the CSI alerts, right? So looking at the calls where we flagged like, hey, this is a call you need to have some attention
Right.
on. Somebody should at the very least look at this call, perhaps read the summary or just look at some of the data points. But most likely this customer needs to be called back. And again, I think that's the key, is that the AI is now taking this giant fire hose of 10,000 calls and it's filtering it down to what we think is going to be actually important. Because again, there's not, you're not mishandling every single call that comes in, right? And also you could handle every call correctly like that. A salesperson could follow a script perfectly, and customers, everyone really, not everyone's rational and gonna, understand some of these things. So they still might be very upset, threaten legal action, threaten to call the OEM and try to file a complaint, whatever it may be. So the fact that we're shining the light on that portion of those calls, that then allows the folks that are good at handling that to go do that. That's what you want those people doing. You don't want them just kind of blindly looking for problems. And again, I think the key is that we're pushing that out, right? So that's what we're focusing on a lot, is having more of this ability to have call review push out and tell you, hey, here's the things you need to look at, right? So some of the things that we're expanding on to kind of tie to the original question is starting to do that in aggregate, right? Like, so looking at that in aggregate versus transactionally, like, hey, here's one call that there was a CSI alert. It's maybe, hey, after a week, let's kind of look at all of the data that happened in the week and, identify trends or patterns and things you can optimize that we're seeing within that week period, and giving that to that management level so they can act on that, so they can look at those themes and understand, hey, this week or this month I'm having a real problem with upset customers because of service issues, right? A lot of cars coming back after they got serviced, right? So just putting those tools out there to just basically allow those folks at the dealership to focus on those high value, potentially high dollar value problems. And I think that's what we see as the key. Because again, like I just like to dispel that myth that, it's not that all your salespeople, all your fixed ops people are doing everything wrong. There's some times where these calls are happening and things are not going right. And you want to know about those, right? So it's really kind of finding the needles in the haystack. I mean, I hate to overuse that analogy, but that is true. That's what we're doing, is we're showing you all the needles that might have happened that you need to act on.
And we're showing you things like junk fees to stay profitable and hoods flying up after service and things along those lines.
And those are real things that
we've sussed out of data, and those are the types of things that we look at and go, man, wow, that's a thing. So
yeah, exactly. If I was a general manager, I would lose my mind if I found out my salespeople were saying we need junk fees to stay profitable because too many of our locations closed last year, right? And like that's something we've actually detected, right? We found these things, and so like management level folks want to know about that, right? Because you now are representing the brand, and at bigger level too, like representing the brand at the OEM level. Like you want to make sure you're aware of these things.
Yeah, I know. I think it's super interesting, some of the stuff that we find in the call data, and when we set the AI loose to aggregate some of the insights, it's very telling on what we can pull out of the data and bring that forward. So we talked a little bit about the positive and what we got there. Let's jump over to some of the risks, right? And we know that one of the things we all are very aware of on this call is AI isn't neutral, right? It's very much biased based on what you're putting in, and it's going to give you the answer back, and it's going to try and be helpful, which can ultimately create confusion, and especially in organizations that don't have those guardrails up, they haven't garden walled it off. They're allowing they may have a rogue employee or somebody who's going out to a Gemini or a Google or one of the big three that are out there. So and Andrew, given that this is your specialty, we're going to start with you here. What are organizations most commonly getting wrong, and what are we seeing, not necessarily technically, but strategically or culturally, when they go to implement AI, and how does that pose a risk to the organization as a whole?
Right. So you kind of hit on it a little bit, but specifically with generative AI. So like in the kind of new world of just everything is LLM based, one of the things that I think folks need to really be mindful of is that you got to think of the LLM as a really smart toddler that wants to help you all the time, right? And wants to flatter you and thinks that you're great. So when you're doing things, you always have to have that in the back of your mind, that its tendency typically is going to be to agree with you. So what I typically do when I'm doing these things is I will be very somewhat negative in my prompting, right? So if I'm bouncing an idea off of an AI agent, I will typically say, hey, this might be a really bad idea, but we're going to build something that does X, Y, and Z, and I want you to be really honest with me, right? And you'll get better feedback. But the other thing too is using different models, right? So if you're working in Copilot, for example, and you're prompting and trying to create something in Copilot, go to OpenAI, do that directly there. Go to Gemini, hit some of the other models, and it's very much like treating it like regular humans, where you're going to get differing feedback. And the other thing I'll say, just as a thought experiment that I think everyone knows, but just to do it really kind of highlights it. If you do something in one, like let's say in Copilot, for example, you want to craft an email to a customer. If you ask Copilot to create that email for you, go copy that email and go put it into another AI agent and then say, this is the email I'm going to send. Is there any changes I should make? It's going to recommend changes, right? It's always going to do something and want to please you and make it look like it's doing something, right? It would literally never say, oh no, that email or that document or whatever you've constructed is perfect. No changes required, right? It's always going to do something, right? And there's also a potential downside in that, is that you have to worry about, or should be concerned about, is what we call AI slop, right? When like the AI just kind of throws extra stuff in there.
RAM prices.
Yeah, it doesn't really need to be in there, right? It's just kind of trying to justify its own existence by adding stuff into it. So that's something that I think everyone should always be mindful of too. Outside of like all the kind of known things of hallucinations, and then obviously when you're talking about generative AI that's customer facing, you obviously need to be concerned about security and kind of the attack vectors that people can do, because you always probably should assume that someone out there is going to try to test it and make it do stupid things, right? And try to get it to go off the rails. So that's always something you should be concerned with. So any teams that are putting that stuff out there, I'd highly recommend doing a lot of kind of internal red teaming first and really trying to hit that thing and try to break it before customers get their hands on it, because you want to know about all those potential problems before your customers do.
Yeah, agreed. And then Brent, just to
Andrew,
follow
wait,
go ahead.
Andrew, explain red teaming, because I love that. I love red teaming, but explain what that is. I don't think a lot of people know.
Right. So that's going to be when you're going to have some internal resources, just really anyone kind of on your side of the fence trying to break your stuff. And typically when we're talking about LLMs and generative AI, it's going to be what we call kind of jailbreaking it, right? Trying to get it to do bad things. And that could be anything as kind of explicit as trying to, we've all seen some of these terrible stories about, these AI assistants that went out on Twitter or whatever and got trained by Twitter, and then within a day they turned into like these like weird racist bots and stuff, right? So you have to be mindful of that stuff. You don't want, because again, if this is going to be customer facing, that is representing your dealership, your brand, your customers. You don't want them interacting with something that can do that. So you want to make sure you're finding all those particular areas first, right? Again, like going back to the example we gave earlier about the dealership that had a chatbot that agreed to sell a car for $1, right? Like that should be caught before that goes out into the public, right? And you should be trying all these attack vectors to make it do these things, right? And it doesn't even have to necessarily be as explicit as trying to get your model to elicit hate speech or sell you a car for $1. If you get someone's model to start pontificating about World War II, for example, for an hour, guess what? Now you're costing that particular vendor a lot of money. It's something called denial of wallet attack, right? You're going to be burning up a lot of tokens. And so there's all these elements that you should probably be thinking about from a security and compliance standpoint before kind of the general public, your customers, can get their hands on these things. So red teaming is a really good way to try to find all those avenues and then go back and adjust your prompting and harden your prompts to really try to stop that from happening.
Yep. Right. Yeah. And then I do want to remind the audience we will be sending out the recording of this after the event, so you'll get that email tomorrow morning when we get everything finalized in post-production. So Brent, real quick, back to you, and then I want to jump because like I thought we were going to be way off time and whatnot. We may have to do a round 2 of this. But last thing on risk, Brent, around risks, Brent, is where do you see leaders really underestimate, when they automate customer-facing or performance-driven decisions with AI? Where are they underestimating some of the things that Andrew brought up? And when you're out there educating them and bringing them up, what are the red flags that you're pointing at directly to say,
flat out, every group that I encounter inside automotive, RV, power sports, and equipment, you name it, somebody at the dealership has there's someone inside throwing PII at a model that again isn't like the organization hasn't said, okay, what platform are we using holistically across the board? And then, even if we're a Microsoft Teams company, everybody's on Teams, so we have Copilot, we're enterprise, but we found that, Sam over in parts or in service has been like throwing PII at ChatGPT or at Grok or at Claude or whatever. So they're throwing things out there and using tools where to what Andrew was saying, like, people are just using them thinking that, sure, I've got my toggle off. I'm not sharing my work with my account to the cloud or anything, but you're still using you're using a $20 a month, your personal thing to handle this. So they're getting into trouble there because now they have to do this crawl back of like, where have we put customer data? Like, how do we then go back in, clean up that account, get that stuff out. That's number one. It's just like what we call like dark tools, right? Like, who in the store is using stuff? Because like to Andrew's point, I thought like organizations need to go, step one is, are we a Google Workspace building? Are we a Teams building? Because if you are, all of a sudden you actually have access to a lot of great AI tools. You don't actually have to go, well, 3 of us are using ChatGPT and I like Claude and I like this. Like, you have to, I get it. I have to use all the tools because I have to teach them. But if you're in an organization, you can't just have everyone willy-nilly using the stuff they like. That's in a perfect world, but it's not a democracy, right? And you have to keep things on lock, especially if you spend the money on an enterprise version of something that gives you that security, that gives you that safeguarding on the public side, on the public tool side. But then you still have clients going, well, I'm using my own ChatGPT. Like, I had a dealer the other day saying, so like, small store, not a big deal. And it wasn't a dumb question, but he said, can we just all use like the same account? Like, same login, same email and login on the account. Like, we all use one account. And I said, you can, but if everyone's using it for everything, it's synthesis, like to your point about it's like this drunk toddler or this golden retriever. Like, if every single prompt about, from, how do I split this recipe to, we had a customer just complain about this service thing and we've got, a new car query, and how do I, build me an itinerary for my trip to Paris? Like, if everything's jammed in there, it's going to become like, you're going to 10x drunk toddler, right? So again, it's just like, these are the common mistakes of like, we want to keep things on the cheap. Let's use one account for everything. But the biggest thing is they may forget that, PII is a big thing. So they don't realize, like, hey, just simply anonymize stuff if you want to test some things out. Rip all the stuff out that needs to be ripped out.
Sure.
So you can actually do some work. But that's the biggest thing, is like, there's a lot of stores out there that haven't really done the audit of, how many people are using it regularly, how many people are using it for work, and what have they built? Like, if you open up their account and look at their sidebar, what's been thrown up there, right?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because I was talking to the one, there's a couple. Andrew knows the story. There's 4 guys that hang out on our street always. We've all assigned each other King of the Hill characters, and we watch all the kids run around as we stand out there. And one of them was talking about to that point is, how do you put Pandora back in the box now that it's really out? And I think some of the things that you and Andrew brought up around the governance and like solidifying around, we are a Google shop, right? We already have all these AI tools. We're an enterprise shop.
Tons.
We're going to have to lock it down, and this is the tool that you're using. And then bringing, teams in, like what you do, Brent, with your org is, now, okay, cool. You've settled around Gemini and the Google tools. Here's how you get the most out of that from that standpoint, on setting up spaces and projects and prompting correctly and things like that. So I know we only have a few minutes left, and I want to ask just a couple more questions. One around, as we close out here, around, kind of we touched on a little bit with leadership responsibility and ethics and putting Pandora back on the box to both of you. What guardrails are essential to keep AI aligned to company values and allowing it to be a force multiplier versus just a fallback to critical thinking, right? And I think that's one of the big challenges that we're seeing is in the industry. And I've had this conversation with my 11-year-old and my 15-year-old now on, they're both using AI. They use it in their daily life. And it's like, I've made the point to them is it's a tool that's there to help educate you, but it is not a tool to give up critical thinking. So what are your thoughts on that from that standpoint inside the dealership, and how do dealers distinguish that line of you're going to use this tool as a force multiplier, to Andrew's point, versus you're just going to give up doing what you need to do and let the AI run everything for you? So Andrew, since Brent just went, we'll start with you there.
Yeah, no, I think it's a tough question. I think that's a question where the answer is always changing. But I think right now, one of the key things there is trying to build in observability and audibility into what is happening, right? So what I mean by that is, like, if you're having an AI system make decisions, there's things you can do on the prompting side to kind of leave an audit trail of how or why it made that decision, right? So even if you're just trying to get a simple yes no kind of thing, like, did this thing happen or not happen, you can have in your prompts things like, okay, if you're going to say yes, you need to explain your answer. Or if you're analyzing a certain piece of a phone call or a certain piece of text, I need you to call out or cite that to back yourself up, right? So it's very much like being back in like high school or college, right? If you're writing papers, like, cite your sources, right? So force the AI to cite its sources to the extent possible, and you're going to be able to go back into those audit trails and see why it did some of the things that it did. And it might make the decision correctly every time. It won't every single time because it's not 100%, but also there's going to be gray areas, right? There are certain times where you can ask 100 humans the same exact question you're asking an LLM, and it might be split 50-50, right? As to, like, what's the correct answer. But I think for now, one of the key things is building your prompts in such a way that you can at least understand why that happened, right? So, and that's not even getting into the whole kind of regulatory and compliance standpoint where that might actually be like a hard requirement. We start to see that more and more. You're seeing that in like banking and financial industries where
Sure.
if you're going to have these models out there, you need to be able to have the audit trails to explain why they're getting to those answers. But that would be what I would recommend at the moment. Is the biggest thing is just giving yourself that ability to have that audit trail. And if for nothing else, you can use that as a tool to make your prompting better, right? Because if you see that, hey, it's getting the wrong answer, if you can go into that audit trail and see, oh, well, it got confused here because it thought this was a reason that X, Y, or Z happened, you can go back to the drawing board, adjust your prompt, and kind of continue your development on that.
Right. Brent?
I think the first thing, and it goes back to, kind of full circle this, is I always tell every workshop I'm working with is like, stop new Googling with this stuff and actually start using it as a thinking partner, because it's amazing for that. But I start every workshop with like, read me your laziest prompt, right? And we're all guilty of it, right? We all use it for something on the quick to give us that quick answer. And it's lovely because we don't have to go through a bunch of links to get that answer back. It gave us exactly what we're looking for. We hope it's accurate, like to Andrew's point, like get the sources on the answer. But so I tell them, because it's given us this output first mentality. Even if we don't understand it, we're just like, this shit's magic and it's giving me stuff right away, and this is smarter than me, and it's not. So the first thing I always tell everyone is like, remember, it's not smarter than you and it's not magic. It needs to understand your business. It needs to understand how you work it. It's a new employee. It's a new employee
Yep.
that needs to be trained and mentored, because it's done learning, right? It's done learning. Now it just needs, because these tools remember and predict. Just like a good employee that's going to remember everything that, if I'm working under Andrew, everything that Andrew's trained me on, I'm going to remember everything that Andrew's told me, shown me, so that I can work through my day. And if Andrew's ahead of a retail environment where I've got to deal with a customer, customers walking in and they ask me a question. It's like, right, what did Andrew say to me? So I always just get dealers wrapping their heads around, remember, this is a thinking partner, not an output machine. So start using it as a collaborator and an assistant. But then I tell, I mean, every dealership group should do like a thorough audit of like who's using it, like on the public side, because again, I'm not on the vendor side, and every vendor's got their own story and their own product they have to build. But I say audit your own staff. Who's using it? What do they like about it? What are they using it for? And then figure out if productivity is actually coming into play, right? Because you may find that people are using it, but no one's using it actually for their jobs. So then you can start to build that intake. And what is that? What is your next phase of helping them learn look like? Then once you get into that education, cycle, then build your policy. Don't build the policy and then go train everyone, because you don't know where you're going to get at the end of the day. Like if you have to foundationally train everyone just on the basics of the tools, like if they're a Google Workspace company and we got to get you through Notebook and Gemini and all those great things, like there's no sense in putting a policy in for like big policy if no one's actually using the tools or understands how to use them. And I've seen it. I've seen that on the OEM level up here in Canada. There was an OEM that put a policy in that basically blocked everything. And I had a person from that OEM in one of my workshops. They couldn't access anything to actually learn how to use it better because the policy had like locked everyone out from everything. It's like dealer website companies like blocking all the bots, so you can't get any right. Like when these things all launch, it's like block every bot in the world, and now they actually have to go back and like unblock all this stuff. So get people, like find out where your people are, what they want to learn, and then after you get that sort of first level down, then start to build the policy out, and then then you get that aha moment.
Yeah, and I think that can be said, and it's I can echo that across so many different tools, right? As you think about leaving AI out of the equation, there are in any organization, and Andrew, I just think about all the conversations you and I have internally, and especially the ones we had with Nate, who's one of our account managers, Brent, and he went out on his own and built one of the coolest implementations we've seen an employee build, at CallReview internally, all with the systems that he's supposed to be using, which is, it was very impressive. But really, it's just understanding, and I love that point, Brent, is understand where your people are, understand where the Pandora's box has been opened at your organization, and then move on with it. So we are a little over time. I'm going to ask each of you one more question, and then we are going to wrap up this episode. And this one's a fun one. It's not too heavy. And Brent, we'll start with you. So, what excites you the most about where AI can take organizations that implement it responsibly? Using the guidelines and making sure that everything is there, and then you can dovetail into that. What excites you the most about the tools in general and where they're going?
I think the thing that excites me most for those organizations is, honestly, it's maybe this is like an undercooked answer. I like it for the fact of, and it's for my own personal use of it, is I can be in the middle of a day that's going very fast and it's very busy, and Slack's going off or my inbox is filling up and it just feels like there's no time to breathe. And you have a moment where you realize you forgot to do something, right? Like, oh shit, I forgot. Like I had to send Eric Glass over CallReview a proposal for this or something, right? Like there's something that comes up in the day where the day is like just an avalanche, right? It's an avalanche day at the store. And you realize at about 3:45 that something big you had to do is gone by the wayside. And it's like that, oh shit moment. And I have those even professionally, right? It's like, oh crap, I got this workshops to do, I have talks to write. And I love the fact that I can stop and remember, wait a minute, right, I've built an agent for this, or I know how to prompt for this. So it can actually, like, I can set a prompt up, let it go, and I can get back to what I'm doing and then come back to something and go, right, I don't have 3 hours of work ahead of me. I'm going to let my thinking partner get me some structure that I can then rehumanize once I get it back.
Right.
So that's the moment, like I said, and it was that general manager at that Honda store, like that I trained last summer, that he was just overwhelmed. And that realization that there are tools there that can actually just give you some balance back in your day. And I get it, because the stores are on this sprint that's unlike most jobs, right? Everything's a 30-day sprint, and it's mental, like absolutely mental, right? So the days are fast, the days are hectic. So to have something like that, like I think where the tools are going, especially from how they're adding more sort of just built-in agentic thinking into what they can do and how you can select things if you know how to use it, then you've got even more power in your pocket, right?
Yep.
It's kind of a weird slogan. Let's not put that on a t-shirt, but
It's going up on Teespring after
it's
this.
going up. It's going to the new call review.
Picture your
slogan,
face.
power in your pocket. Super weird and cringy, but yeah, that's it. It's having that moment of like, wow, okay, like I don't have to freak out. I don't have to stay late. I can actually I can multitask by giving my new digital assistant some work to do, and that's what I really like. And what I'm geeking out on right now is I'm just loving how and I've been playing with this for a while, but I love and it's not even like a clawbot thing. It's just like I've used some systems over the past 2 years where you can tie a bunch of agents together
Yep.
and have them working as a group and not like on their own. I think we talked about that last fall, but that's kind of the fun stuff, is like what can you wire up and build. But there's something every week that I geek out on hard. Like and I'll shut up, but I just used Lovable the other day because for one of my workshops, I had an exercise that we were working off of a PDF I had designed and I'd been using for a while. And I was like, man, what if I took this exercise into Lovable and then turned it in there so they could actually sit and kind of talk about it in teams while they're working. And It's not so much like a doc, it's like a web-based thing. And it's just helping them pull that subject matter expertise out of their head. So that's the stuff I'm geeking on. I love that there's tools out there that I can enhance the education of it while we're in workshop.
Yep. Andrew, what about you?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of things, but if I put on my my shameless plug hat for a minute, I would say one of the things that excites me the most is probably some of the stuff that we're doing with training in the training space,
100%.
in particular, because you know, knowing that a lot of these dealerships, it's a high turnover business, right? Like you're gonna have people you hire off the street. Maybe it works out. Maybe they become your best salesman. They're on for 10 years. But more likely than not, you're going to chew through a bunch of people. You're going to hire someone off the street. Within 2-3 months, they're maybe gone. You're hired someone else, right? So with what Test Track, and obviously kind of powered by everything that's happening with the advances in generative AI, it really lets you do is you let those people try to get up to speed without any customer facing consequences. And as a customer, someone who actually has to go physically buy cars, like I appreciate that, because there's nothing more frustrating than dealing with a salesperson who doesn't know what they're doing, has no people skills, is terrible at their job, right? And you can see that and it becomes apparent. You have questions, they don't have the answer. So if more and more dealers are using this kind of technology to get their sales forces and their fixed ops folks up to speed on the things that they want to be doing, they're going to be that much more efficient. And you're going to weed out the people that you don't really want to be doing that a lot quicker without actually creating friction with your customers, right? Because that's the key in my mind. Because again, on the other side of it is being a customer. I'm going to be pretty pissed if I'm calling a dealership and every single question I have to a salesperson is, I don't know. I mean, I've literally been on the lots before, and I think somebody was telling me like it was like their second week trying to sell cars, and the guy probably had no business being a salesman. But honestly, maybe he did. Maybe he just didn't have enough reps, right? So you get him something like a Test Track within a week or two. He's got hundreds of customer interactions under his belt without actually impacting the real world customer, right? So
Sure.
That's probably one of the things I'm most excited about, because a lot of things we talk about is like identifying the problems and the behaviors and the bad stuff. But this is a fundamental shift, because now it's more of like, hey, let's correct it before it even happens. Before your folks are even getting on the phone or interacting with customers, let's have them train in this low pressure to some extent, because it still feels like you're talking to a real customer, but a low consequence environment, right? Where if you totally screw up that training, no customer's actually going to be mad. You're not losing a sale, and
Right.
You can try again, and you can try a dozen more times, right? So that's probably one of the things I'm most excited for, because it really kind of fundamentally changes how we've been operating in terms of like, hey, let's just tell you everything that's wrong. Well, now we can give you things to make you better, so those things don't go wrong.
Right. And I think you kind of stole mine. That's what I was going to say too, but I will dovetail into that. And I will say it's the scale of what that brings, right, as we close it out. And I think as we wrap this up, because we went a little bit over, thank you guys for sticking with us. I know we usually run these for 45 minutes. I think the thing that most excites me about AI is one, the training, and then two, Brent, what you were saying about having this like always on collaborative teammate that with the right prompting, to Andrew's point earlier in the conversation, if you joined a little bit late, right, is, and I'm intentionally negative with my prompts as well to make sure I get the right results back. And I have all of my master, data sets and all of my different agents that I use set up to say, don't give me any of the fluff. Don't try and be helpful. Just give me the straight answer. Right. But I am able to sit down and do things that I've never been able to do, or I would have to sit down and I'd have to go back to school like you did, Brent, where I'm able to design these systems and design these tools that I can just use in my daily life that just go and do what I want. Like I think about the computer that sits behind me, behind the green screen, that is just doing things right now. I haven't gone so far as to install Clawbot on it yet. I'm getting close, but it's being the giant nerd that I am. It's walking at my office, I think, and in sitting down and say, hey, Jarvis, what do we got today? And just the scene from Iron Man 1 and just going is what I really nerd about. But gentlemen, this has been a phenomenal conversation. As always, thank you very much for joining us. To our audience, thank you for hanging out with us this month on the Inside Track. Watch your emails. We will get a link to the on-demand content out to you tomorrow, and we will see you next month. Thanks, everybody, and take care. Thank you, Brent. Thank you, Andrew. Take care, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.